Does It Hurt by H.D. Carlton is not merely a novel. It's a phenomenological plunge into the twisted depths of the human psyche, a dark psychological romance thriller that unfolds at the nexus of survival, madness, and a perverted affection. This is an exploration of the melancholy of the human soul, the capacity for survival even in the most brutal conditions, and the unfathomable ways in which trauma can shape and distort an identity. Carlton spares no reader, forcing them to confront the most terrifying aspects of human existence: manipulation, violence, and the devastating consequences of psychological wounds. She crafts a world where ethical boundaries blur, and conventional morality ceases to exist, leaving only raw, unfiltered emotions. Crucial and mandatory note: this book is exceptionally psychologically and emotionally taxing. It contains highly explicit and detailed descriptions of violence, psychological, emotional, and at times physical, sexually explicit scenes that often involve elements of coercion or ambiguous consent, and a deep exploration of trauma, gaslighting, and Stockholm Syndrome. Readers sensitive to such content should exercise extreme caution and assess their capacity before reading. The book's purpose is not light entertainment. It aims to provoke, compel reflection, and perhaps even shock. Architects of shadow and light, the main characters. Molly. At the novel's outset, Molly, Etta, seems to be a common young woman living an ordinary life, much like millions of others. Her character does not radiate extraordinary strength or inherent resilience from the first pages. On the contrary, her portrayal, when she finds herself captive, reflects entirely natural reactions: profound fear, complete disorientation, despair, and a feeling of absolute helplessness. She is the archetype of a victim, thrown into a trap from which there seems to be no escape. However, it is under these unbearable trials that Molly demonstrates an astonishing, hidden, even from herself, capacity for adaptation, psychological fortitude, and inner struggle. Her journey is an evolution from a completely subjugated individual to a woman who, despite unimaginable circumstances, begins to seek ways to regain control over her mind and her body. Her fight for her own consciousness, for the preservation of her memories from distortion, for the assertion of her identity. This is the central nervous system of the entire narrative. Her emotional journey, from deep despair, through phases of denial and adaptation to fragile hope and a fervent, though hidden desire to break free, is the driving force of the plot. Every internal conflict, every flash of memory, every act of resistance, even the smallest, underscores her incredible vitality. Callum, the antagonist, whose complexity far transcends that of a simple villain. Callum is not merely a criminal. He is the embodiment of pathological charisma, refined intellect, ruthless manipulation, and, simultaneously, a deep, corrosive psychological devastation. His actions are not impulsive outbursts of rage. They are meticulously planned, every move part of a grand, chilling strategy, and every word a tool for total control. His allure, which might bewilder the reader, is mercilessly combined with cruelty and indifference to others' suffering, creating a figure that evokes both revulsion, fear, and a strange, almost hypnotic fascination. The book gradually, fragment by fragment, unveils Callum's tragic and traumatic past. The reader learns about the horrific traumas he endured in childhood, the abuse, mental disorders, and distorted relationships that shaped his pathological personality. These revelations do not serve to excuse his atrocities. This is not that kind of book. Instead, they provide a deep, chilling context for his motives, his behavior, and the profound extent of his psychological distortion. He is a product of trauma, who now himself becomes a source of trauma for others. His logic is warped and horrifying, but to him it is the only possible and just one. The genesis of a nightmare, abduction, and the psychological labyrinth. The plot starts abruptly and mercilessly, without superfluous preambles, with Molly's horrific abduction. She awakens in complete disorientation, bound or imprisoned in an utterly unfamiliar, isolated location. Her first moments are pure, uncontrolled terror and panic. Callum, her abductor, appears not as a feral monster but as the cold, calculating architect of her new reality. He immediately establishes the harsh rules of the game. He is her sole source of information, her only point of contact with the world, her absolute controller. What is most chilling is that Callum does not resort to direct physical violence in the initial stages. Instead, he employs far more insidious and destructive methods. These are refined psychological torture, systematic gaslighting, forcing her to doubt her own memory and sanity, complete sensory and social isolation, and the creation of an illusory reality in which Molly constantly teeters on the brink of sanity. He manipulates her emotions, consciously alternating moments of feigned kindness with sudden brutality, keeping her in a state of perpetual uncertainty and fear. The purpose of the abduction remains utterly vague. Callum demands no ransom, makes no clear political or criminal demands. Instead, he begins his chilling game, a combination of endless interrogations, psychological experiments, forcing Molly to meticulously recount her past, her fears, desires, and memories. He literally dissects her personality, striving to penetrate the deepest corners of her mind, break her will, and completely subjugate her. The reader, alongside Molly, remains in a constant state of tension, attempting to decipher Callum's motives, which creates an atmosphere of deep psychological suspense. Every interaction is a step into the unknown, where the line between truth and lies, sanity and madness, becomes increasingly thin. The evolution of the nightmare, a web of manipulation, and the dawn of Stockholm Syndrome. Gradually, under unbearable pressure, total isolation from the outside world, and Callum's masterful, sadistically refined manipulations, Molly begins to exhibit the classic, chilling signs of Stockholm Syndrome. Her consciousness, striving to survive and find some logic in this hopeless horror, begins to adapt to the reality her captor has created. She unconsciously starts to see Callum not just as her tormentor, but as her sole support, a source of information, and sometimes even an illusory sense of security or understanding. She begins to search for humanity in him, for minimal displays of kindness or normality, which, in her state, become extraordinarily precious gifts. This creates a terrifying and contradictory dynamic where hatred, fear, dependency, pity, and even a perverted sense of attachment intertwine in a Gordian knot. Key and piercing aspects of the relationship and plot development. Continuous psychological warfare for consciousness. Callum never stops. He constantly provokes Molly, testing her limits, her endurance. He forces her to doubt her own memories, her own recollection, her own sanity. He masterfully exploits her vulnerabilities, her pain, her loneliness, to blur the line between victim and perpetrator, between actual reality and the illusion he meticulously constructs. This is the book's strongest point, demonstrating the corrosive, destructive power of psychological pressure capable of distorting the very core of one's identity. He literally reprograms her mind. The tragic unveiling of Callum's past. As the plot progresses, and as Molly gradually delves into his world, or rather as Callum allows her to, the author slowly pulls back the curtain on Callum's tragic and traumatic past. The reader learns about the horrific traumas he endured in childhood, the abuse, mental disorders, and distorted relationships that shaped his pathological personality. These revelations do not serve as an excuse for his atrocities. This is not that kind of book. Instead, they provide a deep, chilling context for his motives, his behavior, and the profound extent of his psychological distortion. He is a product of inhuman cruelty, who now himself becomes its source for others. His logic is warped and horrifying, but to him, it is the only possible and just one. This evokes a complex range of emotions, revulsion, fear, but also a certain eerie understanding. Molly's tireless quest for her own truth, despite all external pressure and internal contradictions, Molly's inner spirit is not completely broken. A spark of resistance remains within her, her insatiable desire to understand the truth. She begins to piece together fragments of information, analyzing Callum's words, noticing inconsistencies, and searching for clues to understand why she was chosen by Callum, what her role is in this terrifying drama. This search for truth becomes her internal source of strength, her way to preserve her identity, and, essentially, her sanity in this chaos. She begins to see cracks in his perfect, controlled reality. Complex, paradoxical dynamics of attraction/repulsion. Between Molly and Callum, a painful, distorted, and extremely ambiguous form of romantic relationship emerges, a classic manifestation of Stockholm Syndrome, but with a higher degree of intensity. This is not love in any traditional healthy sense. Rather, it is a profound exploration of deformed relationships, where power, fear, psychological dependency, warped compassion, and even a certain perverse, dark allure intertwine. The author masterfully shows how a victim's psyche can be drawn into a vortex of such emotions, especially under conditions of complete isolation, hopelessness, and constant, relentless psychological manipulation. These scenes are among the most challenging to process, as they force the reader to confront moral dilemmas and uncomfortable truths about the human psyche under pressure. Climax and resolution, escaping the wasteland of the soul. The climax of the book arrives when all the pieces of the puzzle finally come together into a single, horrifying picture. Molly, step by painful step, through suffering and fear, discovers the true, shocking reason for her abduction and comprehends the deep, fatal connection between Callum and her own, long forgotten or repressed past. This revelation is devastating and painful. It uncovers ancient secrets, unresolved conflicts, and perhaps even inherited traumas. This moment is an absolute turning point for Molly. Her psychological defense crumbles, but simultaneously this gives her the final, decisive push to fight. Triumph over syndrome. The realization of the complete, stark truth empowers Molly with ultimate strength. She overcomes Stockholm Syndrome, transforming her forced dependence on Callum into a resolute, desperate will to resist him. Her inner strength, which was hidden beneath layers of trauma, is activated. She begins to seek real, physical ways to escape, utilizing every piece of knowledge, every detail she gained during her captivity. This is not merely an escape from captivity, it is an escape from the distorted reality Callum created. The final, psychological confrontation. The resolution involves not only a physical struggle for freedom, though elements of it may be present and intensely portrayed, but also a powerful psychological confrontation. Molly, armed with the knowledge of the truth and her reclaimed will, challenges Callum, shattering his illusory control and exposing his true, horrifying nature. This is a fight for her own dignity, for the right to self-determination, for the return of control over her own life and mind. A multi-layered, often ambiguous ending, like many works in the dark romance and high-level psychological thriller genres, Does It Hurt?, rarely offers a simple fairy tale happy ending. Although Molly may find a path to physical liberation and escape captivity, the consequences of the trauma she endured remain with her forever. The book leaves the reader with profound, unsettling questions about a person's capacity for complete recovery after such an experience, about the long-term impact of extreme psychological violence, and about the complexity of moral choices in extreme situations. The ending may be open, allowing the reader to ponder the character's fates and whether true healing is possible after such deep-seated trauma. This is not about solace, but about survival in the harshest sense of the word. Overarching themes explored in the book. The nature of trauma and its lasting consequences. Carlton doesn't just mention trauma, she delves into its anatomy. The book meticulously explores how traumatic events affect the human psyche on various levels, inducing dissociation, memory loss as a defense mechanism, altered perceptions of reality, the formation of false memories, and a complete transformation of identity. It shows how a victim attempts to cope with unbearable horror, how their perception of themselves, others, and the world around them changes. Mechanisms of psychological manipulation and total control. The novel is a true masterclass in demonstrating various, often insidious forms of psychological abuse. Systematic gaslighting, which undermines trust in one's own mind. Social and sensory isolation, which makes the victim completely dependent on the captor. The cultivation of emotional dependency. Cruel, hot and cold behaviors alternating between kindness and brutality. Constant testing of boundaries. This demonstrates how destructive such an influence can be on a person's consciousness, potentially leading to their complete subjugation. The origins of evil and its legacy. The book moves beyond a simplistic depiction of evil for evil's sake. It seeks to delve into its origins, showing that cruelty and pathological behavior are often the result of one's own deep, unhealed traumas, psychological disorders stemming from childhood, or are part of a vicious cycle of violence passed down through generations. This prompts the reader to consider whether it's possible to understand a monster without excusing them. The phenomenon of Stockholm Syndrome. This theme is central and most disturbing. The book doesn't just state its presence, but meticulously unravels the mechanisms of its formation, from initial fear to gradual identification with the aggressor, the search for humanity within them, and the formation of a twisted attachment as a protective mechanism of the psyche. The limits of human endurance and the indomitable spirit. Despite all the horror unfolding within its pages, this is also a story about the incredible human capacity for survival and adaptation. Within Molly, even in her deepest moments of despair, a spark of inner light and a will to live remains. Her fight for her consciousness, for her memory, for her dignity is a testament to the indomitable nature of the human spirit, even under the most brutal conditions. The complexity and immorality of love in dark relationships. The author challenges conventional understandings of romantic relationships, showing how, in conditions of captivity and trauma, twisted forms of attachment can emerge, masquerading as love, but in reality being a mixture of fear, dependency, manipulation, and warped compassion. This forces the reader to re-examine their notions of love and passion in their darkest manifestations. In conclusion, Does It Hurt? By H.D. Carlton is not a book for everyone. It is not light reading, but a profound, intense, and at times shocking immersion into the darkest aspects of human existence. It is a powerful psychological thriller that makes the reader uncomfortable, yet holds them captive until the very last page. The book is intended for those willing to explore the darkest corners of the human psyche, analyze complex moral dilemmas, and are not afraid to confront harsh reality. It is a story that will leave a deep, perhaps even unforgettable mark on the reader's consciousness, forcing reflection on the nature of trauma, survival, the limits of human relationships, and the intricate twists of fate.